But yeah, thank you all for being here. This organization is just something that I find really fascinating. And I'm really excited to see more science writers come up globally. I've been a science writer for about 3 years now. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that, but please also feel free to ask questions, like I said before, throughout the presentation. I won't be able to see them because I have my slides up right now, but I will get to them after the talk, and then we'll answer all the questions. So if you do have any questions, please just put them up and we'll answer them as we go along. So yeah, my talk is titled Why Science Writing Matters. We're going to talk about the importance of science writing. We're going to talk about what makes a good science writer, as well as essential career advice and just some things I've picked up being an expert in my field. So a bit about me. My undergrads were in biology and English, and then I got my master's in science communication from Imperial College in London. I'm based in Colorado, and as you can tell by my accent, I'm an American. So it's currently about 9:45 p.m. here, so, getting ready to go to bed, but I enjoy having a good chat about writing. I mean, who doesn't if you're a writer? So, of course, I want to keep this conversation going and be able to share what wisdom I've gained over the time that I've been doing this. But my current position is that I'm the Science Communicator at JILA, and the acronym used to stand for the Joint Institute of Laboratory Astrophysics, but it doesn't stand for anything now, partly because we do a lot more research than just astrophysics. We are a leading research institute for physics. We do specifically quantum physics is quite a bit of our research, but we also do astrophysics. We do chemical physics, biology physics, as well as atomic, molecular, and optical physics. So we have quite a few different researchers there, and we take students from all over the world. My background, again, is not in physics, so I'll explain a little bit about how I got the position I currently have, but I absolutely love that job, and I'm really, really lucky to have it. When I'm not working there, I'm a freelance writer. So I've been a freelance writer for about 3 years. I currently work as a science journalist for the Quantum Insider, the Deeptech Insider, and the Metaverse Insider. They're all owned by one company, but they obviously cover 3 different types of topics. And then I work for a separate publication called the Debrief. All of these cover science and technology. So I get to have a fun time playing around with those areas that I'm interested in. So my beats include, so if you're a writer, you always talk about your beats, which are pretty much just the areas that you're interested in, the areas that you write about. So my beats include technology, deep tech, metaverse, which has been a very interesting topic as of recently, VR, quantum technology, and then of course I always like to highlight diversity within the field. So specifically physics and technology, but I also like diversity in general, just talk about, how we need more diverse people of all backgrounds in science specifically. And then, of course, I talk a little bit about science fiction and popular culture perceptions of science. So quite a bit of a broad spectrum when it comes to my beats, but I really enjoy them and I get to continually learn something new. I think that's one of the benefits of being a writer, is that you constantly are learning new things. You're constantly Googling things. You're constantly asking questions or interviewing people. So I think it's really fun. My background when I was an undergrad, I was working in a laboratory and I really liked plants. I was working in a plant laboratory, but I realized that I didn't want to be in a lab. I always joked with people that I really enjoy windows and I don't want to be in a lab that has no windows. So I started looking more into writing. I'd wanted to be a novelist when I was really, really young. And I realized science communication was a way to marry the two. So science and writing. And so I was able to realize as a science writer that I could learn about the research without doing the research and still be able to participate in the culture, still be able to learn about all the cool new things science is doing for us, and just keep my ear to the ground when it comes to new things that are coming out, especially in the technology sector. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I really enjoy that science writing has flexibility, has adventure, intrigue, all this stuff that I think for me personally as like a workaholic and a very driven person, I really, really enjoy. So last year I was a panelist. So in America, we have the National Association of Science Writers. They're a big organization. And they put on a yearly conference where they host different events, talking, and this is a conference for science writers to come and learn about, writing skills, or to learn who's the big writer doing X, Y, and Z. So I was able to be a panelist for one of those talks and talk about how to write about tech, deep tech, and quantum technology, which is not easy. And that was really fun. So I really, really enjoyed that. And I realized, sharing some of the stuff that I've picked up along the way has been really helpful. And I've had quite a few people reach out to me after that. And so I really, really just enjoyed being able to have these connections and conversations with people. So hence why I'm talking to you. So I've also been a podcaster for about 3 years. It's just another thing I enjoy doing. It's a different style of writing. And then, of course, I really enjoy audio editing and doing some fun mixing with that. So it's another fun outlet that I do that's somewhat productive. So yeah, how I became a science communicator. Let's go into how I had got the current job that I have. So like most success stories, this one almost happened by accident, which I think is kind of ironic, but really funny. So as I said, I wanted to be a novelist, but I also love plants. I worked at the Denver Botanic Gardens for a little bit, and I just realized that I really wanted to write. I didn't just want to do research, as I mentioned before. So I realized I could combine both with science writing. My honors thesis, because I was an honors student in undergrad, was writing about science writing and why science writing was important, which got me kind of with my foot in the door for my grad program. So that worked out really well. And I ended up having a mentor at Colorado State University, where I went for my undergrad, who saw my thesis, who helped me get into the grad program and helped me transition from Colorado to a whole different country. And I really had such a fun time abroad. I thought, if you're going to travel, you might as well do something productive and get a degree while you do it. And of course, the nice thing for me is, I really enjoy traveling. I've been traveling for a while. And so I just thought this is a great way to embrace that. Unfortunately, of course, COVID hit. I mean, at this point, most of our stories have that nice, and then COVID hit turn in the middle. So this one's mine. So I was in London when COVID hit. I knew that, the president at the time, Donald Trump, was talking about closing the borders. I was really worried about getting stuck in a country that I wasn't familiar with, especially their healthcare system. So I rushed back to Colorado. Unfortunately, I had to finish my master's degree virtually, but it was still really fun. And I really enjoyed where I was at, because now I was working virtually. And so like most people, I was trying to find a job while I was working. And the nice thing with COVID, if you haven't noticed this already, is that most of the rules when it comes to traditional job finding are out the window. So you can find something online. Most people are embracing the remote work lifestyle now, which is really, really nice. You can kind of play the market by your own rules too, which is really helpful. So I found that was really, really helpful when I started looking at jobs. Around this time in March of 2020, I began a podcast interviewing famous science writers. So people like Deborah Blum, who's won the Pulitzer, Carl Zimmer, I'm trying to remember. The list is really long right now. Cy Montgomery, Olivia Judson. But I decided I wanted to start a podcast that talked to writers about how they write about science. Because it's not easy to write about science. It's one of the hardest things you can write about. And so talking to people about that would be really, really beneficial. And for me, I'm a college student at this time. I'm a nobody. I don't have any sort of connections like this. But I reached out to these writers and they were open to talking to me. They said, I have 10 minutes. I'm happy to talk to you about whatever book I wrote a couple years ago and what I'm currently writing, and give you some advice or whatever. And it was really, really nice. And it just goes to show how open the community is and how small it is. And people are really, really friendly and willing to help no matter what. So I thought that was really, really nice. After that, my LinkedIn, of course, grew because, when you tend to interview people, they tend to tag you, and it works out like that with LinkedIn. So I started reaching out to other publications like the Quantum Insider to write for them, because my network was growing and I thought quantum was really cool. I had just started working at JILA, which was a major institute for quantum research. And I just thought I could kind of tie the two in together. So it worked out really well. And then, of course, kind of my final stage was actually getting the dream job at JILA. So how to land your dream job. Again, this is not, I would say, landing your dream job is not just one path. Everybody lands their dream job differently. And also your dream job can change. It's not going to be the same your whole life. You might in 10 or 15 years think you're going to instead be a professional athlete, or an anesthesiologist or an astronaut. So it really just depends on what you want. But this is the way that I found worked for me, which the first thing was all about networking. So I didn't find out that this job was open until I reached out to a woman who does the science writing news roundup. It's a monthly email newsletter about science communication jobs, events. It's a fantastic resource for everyone. I have it on the resource page. You should get a handout at some point with that as well. But I saw that the job was posted on there because the city is literally right outside, like it's 20 minutes away from my house. I applied, and I was able to get it. The other thing too is I had some of those people that I interviewed for my podcast, the science writers, who were really well known. I asked them, I said, I interviewed you. I know I haven't worked with you, but could you fill out a recommendation for my application? And quite a few of them did, actually. It was very surprising. It was very fantastic. It was very sweet of them. They didn't need to do that. But they offered to, and it really bolstered my candidacy and showed that I had already had some really good connections and relationships within the field, which was really, really beneficial for the people who were hiring me. So my current job at JILA, so what I do is I write and create and design this quarterly journal called Light and Matter, which showcases our researchers at JILA. So we have about 30 JILA fellows or scientists who do a wide variety of research. And so whenever they publish a paper, I take the paper that they've published, which tends to have quite a few jargon words, be formatted in a really unreadable way, and almost literally translate these publications into articles that anybody can read and learn about, which is really, really challenging, but also extremely stimulating. I tend to go back and forth with the scientists I'm writing with, and get some really good feedback from them, learn skills about putting accuracy in my writing without having to make it really dry. It's really, really fun. I work with a scientific illustrator. He's my boss. He did this beautiful cover of the most recent quarterly magazine we had. So it's really, really fun, and I very much enjoy it. I also give a semesterly writing class for students at JILA to help them write better papers or applications. So if anybody has any questions about that, I have several, years of experience teaching people how to do that. I also co-lead a diversity group within JILA, which is the Jedi group. And then I also do all the social media stuff. So it's really fun because I get to do a whole bunch of different things, and I get to interact with people and learn a lot about physics, which is not my background at all, as well as just new stuff coming out in science and academia specifically. And so I really, really enjoy it. So we're going to move from kind of my background into more broad stuff, and I want to make sure I'm not falling behind on time. I'm not good. So we're going to talk a little bit more about why science writing matters, and this is going to be more note-taking for you. So this will be, some things that you might not have known about, or some things that hopefully you'll think about later when it comes to a career, or think about as far as your own writing. So it's really, really good to think about. So first off, you need to be able to quickly and effectively publish your research. So if you don't write or publish your research, you're not going to get the credit, and you might not get the funding. So if you're a good writer, you can tell your story in a relatable way. You can obviously become a better communicator if you're a better writer. So you tend to ace an interview or a job application if you know how to communicate and write better than someone who doesn't. For all scientists, we unfortunately, and I'll talk about this later, have these common stereotypes of being dry and robotic and monotone. And having writing and a personality can help show that you're an actual person, and be engaging and explain what you actually do to people, or do to people, with your research. So that's really helpful. You can also do more with your job or change jobs easily. You have more soft skills. You're also better at networking usually. And as I mentioned, you usually are a better communicator. So science communication, I think people tend to immediately think it's science writing, right? Science communication, you're a science journalist. You write for, Scientist or Psychology Today. That's not true. Science communication actually comes in all sorts of forms and all different mediums. So comics. So, we have quite a few scientists who are actually cartoonists as well. So one of the biggest ones is XKCD, who used to work at NASA. His name is Randall Munroe. He's fantastic. He's written 2 books. They're great, but they explain really hard science and especially physics and fun cartoons. Plays. I met a local Colorado woman who wrote a play about soil science and performed it here, and that was really cool to watch. Obviously, documentaries, magazine and newspaper articles, essays, board games, believe it or not. There's quite a few of those that can communicate science. So the ecologies game communicates how ecologies work, and food webs, YouTube videos, books, and of course, podcasts. So one of the other podcasts I do is called Human Angle. It talks about the background of scientists and making them more human. There's so many other science podcasts out there that are just fantastic, but all of these are, fall under the umbrella of science communication. So it's not just writing, it's literally all these multimedia things, which is really, really nice. If you're looking about doing a job in science communication and you either don't want to write or you want to write and do something else, really the choice is yours. It's an open board. So just a little bit about science communication for scientists. Historically, science communication has been overlooked because, when you think about scientists, the main goal that they have is, of course, research, right? They want to get the data, they want to analyze the data, they want to publish so they can get funding. That's kind of the cycle. But there's a really big step in that cycle, which is you have to write up your results. You have to, work on writing to make sure your publication is good, and then you can publish it. So having really, really good science communication is really, really important. So thankfully, science communication is really beginning to take part in becoming more of an important role in science education and research. In the US, it's still pretty small. We only have a few programs within the colleges that teach science communication, and even then, a lot of them are focused on just science writing. Abroad, there's a few more programs, which is really nice. So it's starting to grow, but the community is quite small. So it allows researchers, of course, to share their work in accurate and relatable ways. But it also teaches scientists, which I think is really, really important, how the media might misinterpret their research or twist something. So, a title of like new study reveals cure for cancer. Well, the new study might not actually do that. It just might suggest something. So the media tends to use words like breakthrough. And that's a very loaded term. So unfortunately, this happens because the media doesn't have a science background. So it's really important as a scientist specifically, but even as a science communicator, to understand how best to communicate your science in a very accurate way, but also in a way that's really relatable, that's really fun and engaging, so that you end up, hooking in your audience. They get to learn a bit more, they get to ask some questions, and your research gets the credit that it deserves. So I'll go a little bit more into media misrepresentation, and some parts of the presentation will cover this as well. But so first off, scientists have a long history of being portrayed wrongly in popular culture. We'll talk about this as well. But Jurassic Park, Interstellar, big blockbuster movies have not really given scientists credit where credit is due. So we have very inaccurate portrayals of scientists. So 3 stereotypes of evil, crazy, or hypersexualized. They're all knowing, which none of these are true. Scientists are very complex people. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then there's this idea of science being really hard. It's a difficult subject to learn. It affects people's self-esteem. There's a study that shows that I believe it's children around the age of 10. That's the age where if they don't understand science or don't feel like they're good at it, they're going to give up about learning it, or it's going to affect their self-esteem and they're not going to like it as much. So it leads people to think about, science is kind of elitist. It's hard to learn. There's a lot of jargon, and this can kind of shut people out from appreciating science or from learning more about science. And again, another reason why we need science communicators. And then, of course, the rise of fake news, which is really, really fun. It's something that happens a lot here in the States, of course. But the standards for journalistic writing have gone downhill because of, working on the internet. It's harder to fact check. There's so much out there. And it's very easy to copy and paste things or make things inaccurate. But science is a big one when it comes to fake news, that they get targeted, and obviously things aren't portrayed correctly. So all important things for why science communicators need to happen. So as I mentioned, scientists being misrepresented in popular culture. So we have the crazy scientists, they tend to be the butt of the joke. Nobody really takes them seriously. They're just crazy. Secondly, which is far less common, but I have seen it multiple times, is just the hypersexualized scientist. So they tend to be an object rather than a person with a voice. So they're very passive. They don't take control. And obviously scientists aren't that either. They're very, very active people, and they have their own agency, and they tend to control their research. So that's obviously not true either. And then, of course, we have the evil scientists, which most people think, scientists are out to get them and control their minds or whatever. Scientists aren't bad guys either, even though they're portrayed as that quite a bit. So these are all stereotypes that we have to work against as science communicators to make sure our scientists are being accurately portrayed. So it's a huge problem. I thought all these tweets were actually really funny because, these are all scientists who talk about how they're being portrayed in a movie, or if they're not being portrayed in a movie. But again, the moral of the story is that scientists are portrayed as untrustworthy or unbelievable, which makes people have a harder time relating to them, to be engaged to what's going on in the research world. And so science communicators really have to come in and try to bridge that gap, which is really, really important. And the other thing too is, scientists are also thought of as super geniuses, right? They're really, really smart. People, look up to them. They can solve all the world's problems, which leads to issues where they don't always admit when they don't know something. And this can also cause distrust, because people refusing to admit what they don't know can lead to problems, or people see that as weak. And it's really important to admit when you don't know things, or say, I'm going to look this up or whatever. It's very, very helpful. So those are two other reasons to think about. So science is hard, as I mentioned. It affects self-esteem because people feel like they're dumb for not knowing something, and it gets this idea where scientists are elitist. So it's just really annoying. One of the biggest things I see with this, going into the second point with the rise of jargon, is jargon tends to be used all the time in movies to explain away things that they don't want to take the time to explain the scientific process of. So the biggest one that I see is quantum. They put quantum in front of everything to explain that it's just a magic thing that, isn't actually scientifically accurate. But it makes for a good point where, quantum is this jargon word. People see it as jargon. They're not going to take the time to understand or learn it. So they're okay with suspending their belief for a little bit and letting this thing happen. So that's just another thing to think about for science communicating. And then, of course, the lack of fact checking is really, really important. We have fake news stories with lack of fact checking. And of course, science is a fake news victim. So that's not very good either. So it's important to always have facts checked. Even if you double check or triple check them, that's really, really important. So I have quite a few questions up here, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just good questions for any science communicator and scientist to ask themselves. So anybody getting the credit, broader implications, next steps. And these are all questions I end up asking my scientists when I interview them for my research articles, because they often lead to really good stories. They lead to really good quotes. And they give me more insight into the research process that I think people would be interested in. So as a scientist or as a science writer, these are, again, good questions to keep in your back pocket for if you ever have an interview or if you're writing a story. They can help kind of lead you down where you need to go. So yeah, anti-science has really been on the rise lately. Even with COVID and everything, it's been kind of interesting. So obviously, In the States, compared to everywhere else, we tend to politicize everything. Surprise, surprise. Most of it is, of course, mask wearing and vaccines. So depending on what side of the political spectrum you're on, you might be pro or against. But the science is still there, and people tend to take it and put political labels on it, which doesn't help. Obviously, we have misunderstanding of scientific processes, so people don't understand what a certain process is, and they just think it's something entirely different. Social media can be really, really, really detrimental to accurate science communication, because you tend to create echo chambers, or there's extreme hatred for the right and the left. So that's really, really hard. And then, of course, as I said, fake news. And then there's, of course, this news balance, which just means that you make two sides equal, even though they aren't. So one of the good examples is climate change. So people, when they look at the debate for if climate change is man-made or not, they try to make it balanced, even though the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly showing that it is man-made. They'll still try to show that there's a balance and there's an argument against, which isn't accurate either. So some case studies of science being inaccurately portrayed. As I talked about before, kind of with COVID, we've seen a lot of fake news already popping up. So COVID and 5G, that was a big one when COVID first came out. People were freaking out that 5G was causing COVID, which clearly is not how viruses are spread. So it's just another example of inaccurate science, and where science communicators can come in and kind of fix the problem. The second one is, of course, the really famous vaccines cause autism argument, which was clearly not true. But thanks to the media spinning stuff, and thanks to a falsified study, this started to be a prevailing theory, to the point where people refuse to get vaccines. So just another example of how things can be kind of spun out of control, and where science communicators can come in. And then, of course, this one isn't as prevalent as much, although it pops up now and then, but GMO crops. Here in the States, we have quite a few people who are very much against GMO crops. So it just turns out to be really interesting, because the science, of course, behind GMO crops is that there's really no good or bad labels on them. They're just genetically modified. And so it's really interesting to see where the media comes in and kind of spins them as either good or bad or whatever. So again, when you're looking at the news, when you're reading the news, look at what is being portrayed when it comes to science, what sort of words are being used, what sort of slant is being used in the writing. And that'll kind of give you some more insight into how you can spin it better, or how you can better accurately portray your own research, or article you're writing, or something like that. So that's also really good to look at too. So unfortunately, this is all of this. What I've previously been talking about is what you're up against. So you're constantly fighting these stakes of, science being elitist, scientists being inaccurately portrayed, science being hard, fake news. We're fighting all this to make the stakes more understandable, and to make sure that science is being accurately portrayed to a general public. So again, as I mentioned before, but here's different reiterations of why this is important. So, people understanding basic scientific processes, so understanding that 5G doesn't actually give you COVID is really, really important. But of course, grants and funding for research is really, really helpful. Inspiring others to pursue a science career or science writing career is really, really nice. And just being able to be a good and accurate writer and a relatable person is really, really important when it comes to that. Helping people to understand how the research process works. If anyone understands how the research process works, I'm amazed, because it's always different, and accidents always happen. But it is something that I think people don't realize, how difficult research is, or how nonlinear it can be. So this is another place where good science writing comes in handy. Educating people on how the world works, tackling bigger problems, of course, and then, the last thing is combating fake news, which is always helpful. So how to use your writing and your voice, allowing your story to be told is really, really important. Making yourself relatable, making yourself part of the story, showing your place in what you're doing is really, really helpful. It makes people engaged and shows that you're a real person. being honest and being vulnerable is the next thing. Showing people, hey, we ran into a dead end, we have a null result, this experiment totally failed, shows people that you're human, shows that science is a human endeavor, and it makes people more interested in what is going on. And then, of course, the really important thing is to make sure to over-clarify. So you need to make sure that everything is properly explained. What I tend to do is I tend to explain things to my mom, who doesn't have a science background, and if she can get it, then I know pretty much anyone can get it. So having somebody like that can be really, really beneficial. So how do I work on being a better writer? This is a good question that I get a lot. The first thing is to read. So read up on everything. If you're a really good reader or a really avid reader, you tend to be a better writer, just because you pick up more vocabulary, you know what's going on currently, you've read, the latest books on science writing and communication is really helpful. Working on self-editing is really, really important too. So, making sure that you are able to write your own work, or to edit your own work, and to find your written voice is really, really good, because you tend to find better self-esteem if you can find your own voice in writing. But if you're able to self-edit too, there's a strength that comes into that, to be mature enough to say, I'm going to change my work. I'm going to put a different spin on it. I'm going to put different words on this. It's really, really good. Get tutored on writing. Obviously, you can take, a workshop like this one is really beneficial, or you can reach out to me. You can obviously reach out and work on the one-on-one workshops that we were talking about earlier through Cell Savvy. Those are all really beneficial. But getting tutored on writing is really good too. Having a mentor is also really beneficial for this as well. Having somebody else who has gone through the process, who can give you advice, is really good. So watching videos, listening to podcasts, and of course, watching and reading the news and looking objectively at how the media is portraying science, what the articles are saying, how they're writing it, what words they're using, can be really beneficial when you parse out things that are going on. So successful science communication. So obviously, as I said, it's really, really hard to be good at successfully being a science communicator, but it is possible, and it's really, really fun. And you get to meet a lot of great people. You get to learn some amazing research. You find a lot of really cool jobs, as I mentioned. But there are a lot of really great science communicators already out there. So we'll talk a little bit about who they might be. So the first one is Chris Ferry. He lives in Australia. He's fantastic. He's a quantum scientist, but he also has a series of books on quantum physics for babies. He does astrophysics for babies. He does a whole bunch of different scientific concepts for babies. And so, if I'm having a bad day, I think about his books and I think, okay, if a man can write quantum physics for an audience of infants, I'm sure I can get through my job. So I just have so much respect for him, because he is just an amazing writer and is able to break down really hard topics into really easy ideas. The second one is Randy Olsen. He's a scientist turned documentary maker. He's made quite a few critically acclaimed films. One of them is, of course, on climate change. But he talks more about the scientist side of things, where if they're listening or not, and how they can have better relationships with the media. But clearly, he's worked well enough that he has ended up teaching filmmaking classes, I believe, at UC Davis. Just a fantastic science communicator. And the third one is Shawn Carroll, who does a podcast, All Things Science. He brings on some amazing guests to talk about just what they're doing, what the current research is. And it's a really nice thing, because anybody from any background can listen to it, and it's very engaging. And he does a really good job of communicating difficult science concepts. So again, science communication is really for everybody's benefit, not just for you. You end up bettering the stereotype of science if you can be a better writer and speaker and presenter. But for you personally, you can get your dream job like I did. You can get into graduate school. You can get better funding or win an award or publish more papers. Whatever your goal is, being a better writer in general, and especially a science writer, can get you where you need to go. So that's really why science writing matters. But now I'm going to move on quickly, because I want to make sure I'm not running out of time and answering questions, to getting to a bit of career advice, just for if you're looking to be a science writer specifically. But Science Communicator, these are all career advices too. So connecting with people on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a great place to do this. This is, where all of us go to meet people to get jobs. So make sure that your LinkedIn looks good. Make sure that you're connecting with people. Obviously, taking a risk. So reach out to people. Apply for a job that you might not have all the skills for. It doesn't matter. The worst that can happen is that you say no or people don't answer. But again, the writing community I have found is really, really friendly. People can reach out to you. So it's good to take the risk. And then, of course, finding the right websites for jobs. So there's plenty of science writing jobs out there. So it's good to have the right websites to find those jobs. I have a list later that you can see, and I'm sure you'll get a handout, but it's just good to know where to look to find the job that you might want. So book recommendations, I mentioned a few of these. Some of these are, of course, about writing science. So they say, I say, Houston. We have a narrative, writing science. But some of them are also about just kind of the common perceptions of science. So on Scientific America, MIT's Knight Science Journalism program has a great science editing handbook. So these are all great. I would make sure if you're interested to read all of these. They're all really funny. They're all really engaging. I use quite a few of these for my class. So they're really, really wonderful. And then I do have quite a few links right here of, resources. So jobs, newsletters, communities to join, places to go. These are all, unfortunately, I think most of them are based in the US, but because writing is a global community, they have people from all over the world joining them. So it's not just all Americans or all British people. So that's really nice. But yeah, these are all great because they can also give you kind of the newest stuff that's happening within the world of science writing, including books to read or authors to talk to, which is really, really nice too. So a couple tips on if you're going to be a freelance science writer. So if you just want to pick it up on the side, first off, and these are good tips to have for like kind of any job too, but don't sell your work short and make sure you obviously negotiate good pay. If you're going to go into writing or any sort of creative degree, make sure you have a portfolio so people can see what you've previously done or where you've ended up. Continue to write. It doesn't matter for who or if it actually gets published, but practice your writing because the more you practice, the better you'll get. Obviously, networking is really, really beneficial. For any sort of work that you do, make sure it's always on time and in the right format, double checking. And if you're going to be a writer and if you're working for a marketing firm or something, SEO is really, really helpful. So again, these are all just basic skills to have, but they're really, really beneficial. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I will go to questions. I hope everybody understood everything, and thank you all for listening. So let me go back here. Stop sharing. Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Kenna. Thank you so much. It was a super insightful and yet very fun sort of a talk. I really loved those little pictures that you had put up and the context in which you explained them. The flow of the presentation was just amazing. So we got like experiences, we got your background, we got tips at the end, we got the entire process, we understood why it is so important for us to pursue science writing. So fantastic. Thank you so much. For the audience, two things. One, we are going to be opening up for questions and answers, and you can ask all your questions, and I'm sure she'd be happy to answer. But also, whatever resources Kenna just showed on the slides, those resources we will be compiling into a PDF and we'll be sending it to you. We'll be emailing them to you. So please don't worry about that. All the books, recommendations, all the websites, everything. Okay, so can we have questions now, if any? You can put them in the Q&A tab of the chat box, and can start answering them.
I promise that there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Yeah, there is no such thing as a stupid question. Definitely. So anyone, any questions? Feedback on the session, something you want to share with Kenna? Anything? Okay, we're just going to give it like a minute to just see if we are getting any questions. We don't have any right now. Okay, can we all have a thumbs up just to know there is no technical glitch, you know? Yeah, okay. Okay, great. Thank you so much. So if you do not have questions now, but if you have them later, would it be okay if they would, send them to us and we could email it to them or maybe contact you directly? Would that be okay with you, Kenna?
Absolutely. I did put my email on the slides, but anybody is welcome to have it. I am happy to put it in the chat if that works for you.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I will do that. And if anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to email me. My inbox is always open. I take questions from literally anybody, so so I promise I don't bite. I'm very, very approachable. Please don't worry about asking.
I know that for a fact. I can vouch for that. And yes, she's also very, very active on LinkedIn. So, and she does some wonderful stuff. And when I came to know, like, you actually, have 3 podcasts in itself. I mean, thinking of beginning one gives me the jitters, like literally. So, yeah, okay, we have a question. Amol is asking, how do you deal with pseudoscience issues?
That is actually an excellent question. So when I worked at the Denver Botanic Gardens, I focused on medicinal plants. And I ended up writing them a virtual tour of medicinal plants to go through their gardens. And I can tell you that there's probably, it's probably one of the biggest pseudoscience fields is medicinal plants. Because of course you get people who say, well, this plant doesn't work or this plant does work. And, when it comes to pseudoscience, I can say, there is no better strategy than making sure you have your facts in order. Fact checking is probably the biggest thing you can deal with pseudoscience. So making sure that everything has been peer reviewed, making sure that you find all the data, you look at it yourself, you talk with the scientists, you see what sort of research process they've done, is really, really beneficial. But I think the other thing when it comes to pseudoscience is to look at how the field became a pseudoscience, if that makes sense. So, back to my example of medicinal plants, these plants are actually very effective. But all the evidence we have goes back centuries of just anecdotal evidence. So, women talking about using a plant to help with birthing or some sort of natural contraceptive. That's not obviously been peer reviewed. That hasn't been researched and published somewhere. But it's still data. So I think, looking at that as well. The other thing when it comes to medicinal plants is a lot of times they've been diluted so many times that they're not effective. And that's where another pseudoscience thing comes in because people don't think they actually work when they might actually help. So yeah, I think looking at the context, looking at the entire process is just really, really beneficial. So does that answer your question, Amal? I hope it does.